Was about to give my son $900,000, but an overheard conversation made me decide to completely destroy his future. Hello everyone, my name is Arthur. I am a retired structural engineer. After my wife passed away, my world fell apart. Only Jack remained, my only son. He was my greatest concern. I watched him grow up. I watched him marry Chloe. I always believed that a father's responsibility was to be a foundation for his child. I was willing to sacrifice everything. I had planned to transfer all of my life savings to him and his wife, $900,000, an enormous amount. It was sweat. It was tears. It was the sleepless nights I spent on construction sites. I wanted them to have a perfect launch pad. I had finished all the paperwork. The check was tucked neatly inside my jacket pocket. The trust documents already bore my signature. All I had to do was hand them over. I thought I would see the happy smile on my son's face. I thought I would have a peaceful old age surrounded by my children and grandchildren. But life does not operate according to dry physical laws. A hidden crack had appeared without my knowing. Instead of handing over $900,000 in life savings, I spent the following week orchestrating a financial demolition they never saw coming. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a drink, some snacks, make yourself comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose otherwise. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story and hit subscribe. You're going to enjoy this one. Betrayal never comes from only one side. It builds from the smallest cracks. It gnaws away at trust. Then when pressure arrives, the entire system collapses in an instant. The feeling is like a load-bearing beam snapping under enormous stress. Painful and help. Let me tell you about the day the structure of my life was completely deformed. The day I stood in front of my son's house. It was a gloomy Friday afternoon. I stood outside Jack's house. In my hands was a folder containing a check for $900,000. I wanted to surprise them. I didn't knock on the door. I wanted to walk in and see the look of astonishment on my son's face. But my hand froze in midair. A sound slipped through the narrow gap in the glass door. Chloe's laughter, sharp, cold, piercing. She was on the phone. The speaker was turned up loud. The voice of the man on the other end came through with calculated confidence. They were discussing the creation of a shell company, a front LLC. Chloe laughed loudly. She said the old man was about to fall into the trap. That old man was me, the father standing outside trembling with the check that represented a lifetime of work. I stood there in shock. My entire body seemed frozen. Every sense was on high alert. My engineer's mind began analyzing everything I was hearing. Chloe's words felt like a shock load exceeding the structural limits of a building. She was explaining how they would transfer all of my money into the shell company's account. Then they would use that money to buy an apartment solely in her name. But what made my heart bleed was not Chloe's greed. It was Jack's agreement. My son, the child I once carried in my arms. He was sitting directly across from her. I could see his silhouette through the frosted glass. He sighed. Then he spoke a sentence so cold it cut straight through me. Dad has become such a nuisance lately. He's starting to lose it. Putting him in a nursing home is the best option for all of us. Your plan is perfect. Just do it. A nuisance old man. That was how they described the foundation that had supported their entire lives. I felt my chest tighten. Clear's throat. An enormous weight pressed down on my shoulders. It felt as though every supporting column in the house of my youth was splitting apart. Betrayal from strangers can wound you. Betrayal from your own blood is the fatal blow that destroys the structure from within. They had no idea I was standing right behind that door. They continued enthusiastically painting pictures of how they would spend my money. They laughed at my old age and my kindness. Chloe stroked the wedding ring on her finger. She urged Jack to quickly complete the paperwork, declaring me mentally incompetent. They wanted to lock me away. They wanted to strip me of my basic rights before taking every last dollar I had. The initial pain quickly faded. In its place came a cold sensation running down my spine. Every ounce of compassion I had left was gone. A crack had finally appeared in the glass, and I knew this structure could no longer be saved. I looked down at the folder in my hands. Then I smiled, the smile of a demolition specialist. They wanted a game. I would give them a war, but I would never step into that house again. I turned around and walked away in silence. I knew exactly what I had to do next. A quiet counterattack was already taking shape in my mind. and my first move would make them pay a price beyond anything they could imagine. I walked down the stone steps. Each footstep felt as heavy as lead. The laughter of Jack and Chloe still echoed vividly in my mind. I headed straight to my pickup truck. I shut the door behind me. Instantly, the world fell silent. The only sound left was my own ragged breathing. I looked into the rearview mirror. My face was old and deeply lined with wrinkles, but my eyes no longer carried the warmth of a father. They were as cold as hardened steel beams. My capacity for forgiveness had officially reached its breaking point. I opened the folder resting on my lap. The $900,000 check lay quietly inside. It had once been a symbol of my unconditional love. Now it was nothing more than fuel for the greed of two ungrateful people. My fingers touched the edge of the paper. Then I began to tear. The ripping sound echoed through the cramped cabin. Sharp, final. It sounded like a steel support beam snapping in half under unbearable pressure. I shredded the check into hundreds of tiny pieces. Then I tore apart the trust documents as well. I watched the scraps drift onto the truck's floor. The pain lasted exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds. That was the time it took to drive from my son's house to the main road. At the 13th second afterward, the structural engineer inside me took control. I didn't cry. I didn't turn back to scream or demand answers. That would have been pointless. When a structure has rotted from its foundation, trying to repair it only wastes time. The only solution is a controlled demolition. It has to be brought down with absolute precision. I started the truck. The engine roared to life. I pressed the accelerator and drove into the light rain of the late afternoon. My mind was operating like a supercomputer. I began drawing the demolition blueprint for Jack and Chloe's future. They wanted to lock me in a nursing home. They wanted to prove I was mentally incompetent so they could steal my money. They thought I was a weak old man who could easily be manipulated. That was their fundamental mistake. They had forgotten who I was. I was the man who had built structures capable of surviving earthquakes. I was about to show them what a structural engineer could do when he decided to tear something down. I would not use violence. I would use the law and their own greed as explosives. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a familiar number. The person on the other end was the only one who could help me design the blueprint for this trap. My truck sped down the highway. My destination was a law office, the place where the true turning point in their lives would begin. I pushed open the door to Sam's law office. The room was filled with the scent of paperwork and bitter coffee. Sam had been my closest friend for more than 20 years. The moment he saw the cold expression on my face, he knew something was wrong. I sat down. I got straight to the point. Sam, I want a full audit of every account Jack and Chloe have ever had access to. Sam didn't ask many questions. He immediately started typing on his computer. Lines of financial data began scrolling across the screen. Every number that appeared felt like a knife stabbing into my chest. The confidential audit uncovered horrifying truths. Over the course of a year, Chloe had secretly withdrawn $62,000 from one of my secondary credit accounts, and that wasn't the worst part. The computer displayed a pending transfer request. Jack was attempting to steal another $300,000 from my retirement fund. He had initiated the transaction while I was driving to the office. They couldn't even wait any longer. They wanted to drain me dry while I was still alive. Sam looked at me with sympathy. He asked whether I wanted to take them to court immediately. I shook my head. If I sued them now, they would simply return the money or receive a few years of probation. That would be far too gentle for the cruelty they had shown. I wanted a complete collapse, a demolition that could never be salvaged. I stared at the financial chart displayed on the screen. My engineer's mind found the critical weakness in their plan. They needed money to keep their shell company alive. They were desperate for capital to purchase the apartment they wanted. They believed I knew nothing. They thought I was still a confused old man carrying around a check and handing out love. I turned toward Sam. A cold smile spread across my face. "Freeze that $300,000 transfer," I told him. "But don't make a scene. We're going to give them another path. A path that leads straight off a cliff. We're going to give them exactly what they're asking for, but hidden inside it will be a financial Trojan horse that burns their world to the ground." Sam understood immediately. A look of surprise and admiration flashed across his face. He opened a new document on his computer. The technical blueprint for the perfect trap began to take shape. It wasn't an ordinary gift agreement. It was a financial commitment designed to be devastating. That night, we remained in the office together until the final provisions were completed. I knew Jack and Chloe were probably at home celebrating, convinced that the money would soon be theirs. What they didn't know was that the most powerful storm of their lives was already racing toward them. Attorney Sam typed the final lines into the document. The clatter of the keyboard echoed through the late-night office. The blueprint for the hidden trap was complete. This was not a gift agreement. It was a business financing contract. The lending party was Apex Investments, an investment fund that Sam and I had created specifically for this plan. Legally, the $900,000 would be transferred into Chloe's Shell LLC, but attached to the money were extraordinarily strict conditions. The funds could be used only for the development of a legitimate commercial business project. If they used even a single dollar to purchase a private apartment or cover personal expenses, the trap would immediately spring shut. The contract defined such actions as financial fraud. I studied every clause carefully. Black text stood out sharply against the white pages. To an ordinary person, they were nothing more than dry legal language. To me, they were hydraulic charges strategically installed at the most critical load-bearing points of a structure. The moment Chloe touched the money and redirected it for unauthorized purposes, the alarm system would activate. Federal investigators would become involved. It would become a criminal matter. No attorney would be able to save them. Sam looked up from his desk. He asked whether I was absolutely certain I wanted to sign. If I signed, I would have to pretend to be a confused old man in front of my own son. I didn't hesitate. I picked up the pen. I signed on behalf of the investment fund. The pain inside me had completely disappeared. At that moment, I was simply an engineer performing his job, demolishing a structure that had already rotted beyond repair. I understood Jack and Chloe's psychology perfectly. Greed would blind them. The moment they saw the figure of $900,000, they would never bother reading the detailed provisions buried in the appendices. They would sign immediately. They would believe they had outsmarted this old man. They would congratulate themselves on how easily their plan to place me in a nursing home was succeeding. I closed the folder and slipped it into my coat pocket. Sam stood and shook my hand. He wished me luck. I walked out of the law office. The clock showed 2 o'clock in the morning. The city outside had fallen asleep, but inside me a fire was burning. I took out my phone and sent Jack a message. I wrote that I missed them and wanted to come over for dinner the next evening to present them with a special gift. Jack replied almost immediately. His message was overflowing with artificial sweetness. I put my phone away and smiled. Tomorrow night's dinner would be the moment I personally handed them Pandora's box. They would open it with excitement. They would have no idea what was waiting inside. I arrived at Jack's front door at exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. I had deliberately worn an old, worn-out coat. My shoulders slumped forward. I carefully projected the appearance of an exhausted old man. When the door opened, Chloe greeted me with the brightest smile I had ever seen on her face. But my eyes immediately caught a detail that was worth everything. Around her neck hung a sparkling diamond necklace, a necklace worth tens of thousands of dollars. It had been purchased with the very $62,000 she had secretly stolen from my accounts. She had used my stolen money to buy jewelry. And now she wore that necklace while welcoming me into her home. The shamelessness of it hit me like a bucket of ice water thrown directly into my face. But I did not get angry. I buried every emotion. I stepped inside with deliberately shaky footsteps. The dinner was lavishly prepared. Jack continuously placed food onto my plate. He asked about my health in the sweetest tone imaginable. Meanwhile, Chloe could barely hide her impatience regarding the gift. I pretended to place a hand against my forehead. I muttered a few meaningless phrases like someone beginning to lose his memory. I noticed the two of them exchanging glances. Victorious smiles briefly crossed their faces. They believed I had become completely confused. They believed their plan to place me in a nursing home would be effortless. With trembling hands, I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the Apex Investments folder. Then I placed it on the table. In a weak voice, I told them it was a gift for their new company. Chloe immediately snatched up the folder. Her eyes lit up with pure greed. She flipped directly to the page, displaying the figure of $900,000, exactly as I had predicted. Her mind, blinded by money, completely ignored the appendix pages filled with fine print conditions at the back. Chloe had no idea that she was smiling at a sentence while believing it was a winning lottery ticket. She nudged Jack with her elbow. Jack immediately grabbed a pen. The two of them hurriedly signed the hidden trap contract. They signed with such urgency as though afraid I might change my mind. They had no idea that every stroke of ink they placed on those pages was another nail being driven into the coffin of their own financial future. I collected my copy of the agreement. Carefully, I slipped it back into my pocket. Then I stood. I told them I was tired and needed to leave early. Jack and Chloe escorted me all the way to the front door with exaggerated respect and courtesy. As I reached my pickup truck, I glanced back through a gap in the window. The two of them were embracing and dancing around the living room in celebration. They believed they had defeated this old man. They believed a life of wealth and luxury was waiting just ahead. But how long would that joy last? As I started the engine, I already knew the answer. The detonator had been activated, and their very next move would bring the entire structure of their lives crashing down with their own hands. 3 days after that dinner, Jack unexpectedly came to my house. He wasn't with Chloe, he came alone. His face was carefully arranged to look concerned, but his eyes revealed obvious nervousness. He carried a thick stack of documents with him. It was a petition seeking to have me declared mentally incompetent. They wanted to legitimize taking control of my assets. They wanted to place me in a nursing home as quickly as possible so they could freely spend the $900,000. Jack sat down across from me. He began speaking in a gentle, persuasive tone. He said my memory had been getting worse lately. He said I needed special care somewhere better equipped to look after me. Then he slid a pen and the paperwork across the table. He told me all I had to do was sign. He would take care of everything else. I looked at my only son. At that moment, my heart felt completely empty. Not a trace of parental warmth remained. He was personally helping build a prison wall around the father who had raised him. I didn't argue. Instead, I pretended to stare around the room in confusion. I picked up the pen with deliberately trembling hands. Then I began to sign, but I did not sign my real name. I used a technique attorney Sam had instructed me to follow, a signature made under apparent coercion. I intentionally misspelled my middle name. I abandoned my normal handwriting and switched to crude block letters. I signed slowly. The deliberate shaking of my hand caused the ink to smear in several places. Jack stared at the pen. He seemed to hold his breath. The moment I finished the final stroke, he immediately grabbed the document. A relieved smile appeared on his face. He thought he had successfully deceived me. He quickly gathered the paperwork and stood up to leave. He walked away with the confidence of a man who believed he had just conquered a kingdom. But he was wrong. That petition carrying a block letter signature and an incorrect middle name would never have the legal power to harm me. On the contrary, it would serve as powerful evidence that I had been pressured by my own child while not acting voluntarily. He had just handed me the final piece of evidence I needed against him. If you've made it this far, then this story has probably stirred a few emotions. Please help us with one quick favor. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've watched this far, and tell me what you think the final outcome of the story will be to see whether your prediction is correct. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs nothing and means a great deal to us. I stood by the window and watched Jack's vehicle disappear down the road. Tomorrow was Monday. It was the day Chloe had scheduled an appointment with a real estate office to sign the purchase agreement for an apartment that would be titled solely in her name using the money she believed she had secured. They thought tomorrow would be their coronation. They had no idea that Sam and I would be there as well, and we had already prepared a very special presentation for them. Monday morning, the downtown real estate office was flooded with sunlight. The air was thick with the expensive perfume Chloe was wearing. She sat confidently in a luxurious leather chair. Jack sat beside her. Their faces glowed with the happiness of people who believed they were about to reach the top. On the table lay the purchase documents for a luxury apartment worth nearly $1 million. The real estate agent slid the contract toward Chloe. She picked up an elegant fountain pen with her slender fingers. The diamond necklace around her neck sparkled beneath the office lights. Chloe glanced proudly at Jack. She was preparing to sign her name and claim the money. She believed that from this moment forward her life was entering a new chapter. The instant the pen touched the paper, the glass office door suddenly swung open. 2 people walked inside. Sam and I. The smile on Chloe's face froze instantly. Jack jumped to his feet. Both of them stared at me in disbelief. I was no longer wearing the worn-out coat. I was no longer moving with trembling steps. I stood straight, dressed in a tailored black suit. I looked less like a frail retiree and more like a chief engineer inspecting a major construction project. My eyes remained fixed on them. Cold, sharp, unyielding. "Dad," Jack stammered. His gaze shifted toward the folder in my hand containing the documents he had pressured me to sign only days earlier. Panic began to appear in his eyes. He realized that my confused behavior 3 days earlier had been nothing more than an act. I walked to the conference table, pulled out a chair, and calmly sat down across from them. Sam placed a leather briefcase on the table. He looked directly at the real estate agent and instructed him to halt the transaction immediately. The agent stared at us in confusion. Only then did Chloe recover from her shock. Her greed and arrogance quickly returned. She slammed her hands on the table and stood. She shouted that I had no right to interfere. She insisted that the $900,000 already belonged to her LLC. The financing agreement had been legally signed. I didn't bother arguing with her. Instead, I simply looked at Sam. Sam responded with a professional smile. Then he opened his case and removed a document bearing an official red seal from a federal financial regulatory agency. In a clear voice, he made the announcement. The entire $900,000 held in the LLC's account had been frozen 2 hours earlier. The reason: evidence of financial misconduct and the diversion of business loan proceeds for unauthorized purposes. The color drained from Chloe's face instantly. The fountain pen slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the floor. Jack staggered backward. In the silence of the room, it felt as though the pounding of their hearts could be heard by everyone present. Their coronation had transformed into a courtroom. But that was not the worst part. Sam reached into the briefcase once more. Then he withdrew a second document. A single piece of paper. The document that would detonate the remainder of their carefully constructed world. The second document Attorney Sam pulled from his briefcase was an emergency arrest warrant. Behind us, 2 uniformed police officers entered the office. Chloe let out a piercing scream. She grabbed the edge of the table to keep herself from collapsing. Sam read the charges aloud. Federal financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to seize the assets of a senior citizen. Organized theft of property. Every piece of evidence had already been collected. The recording of the conversation outside the house, the records showing the unauthorized withdrawal of $62,000, the pending attempt to take $300,000 from my retirement fund, and most importantly, the petition they had pressured me to sign bearing block-letter handwriting and an intentionally incorrect middle name. It was undeniable evidence of coercion. Jack stood frozen, his face turned the color of ashes. He looked at me with desperate eyes. Then he began to cry. He begged for forgiveness. He claimed Chloe had manipulated him. He insisted that he was still my son. I looked at him. My heart felt as cold as winter ice. The bond between a father and a son is not a physical constant. It is a structure that requires maintenance from both sides. The moment Jack agreed to lock me away, the final support beam holding that structure together had permanently broken free from its foundation. I turned my head away. The officers stepped forward. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. They cuffed Chloe first. At that same moment, an emergency notification arrived from the Real Estate Licensing Board. Chloe's professional license had been permanently revoked. Her career was over. Her future disappeared behind the doors of a federal prison. As they were escorted out of the building, every trace of arrogance vanished. Only panic remained. The moment they reached the sidewalk, the mask of love they had worn shattered completely. Chloe turned toward Jack and began screaming at him. She called him weak, pathetic, spineless. Jack did not remain silent. He furiously blamed her greed for dragging them both into disaster. The 2 people who had once promised to stand by each other forever were now tearing each other apart like wild animals. Their broken structure was crushing itself without any help from me. Pedestrians stopped to watch. Some pointed, others recorded the scene on their phones. It was the most satisfying collapse I had ever witnessed. I stood above it all, watching the complete destruction of everything they had built. My controlled demolition had succeeded exactly as planned. But as the storm finally passed, another question remained. What was I supposed to do with the rest of my life? The doors of the police vehicle slammed shut. Jack and Chloe were carried away toward the detention facility. And as the vehicle disappeared from sight, I realized that it was finally time to make the last decision of my own life. The sound of the police sirens gradually faded into the distance and disappeared into the crowded city streets. The noise was gone. All that remained was me and the clean air of freedom. I returned home. I gathered the memories worth keeping. Then I made the decision to sell the old house. It was a house tied to too many painful cracks. I moved to a peaceful mountain region, a place surrounded by old pine trees that stood firm against the endless winds. Every day I sat on the porch of a small wooden cabin. Using the knowledge I had gained over 30 years of work, I began designing a new structure. It was a charitable home for orphaned children. The entire project was funded by my $900,000. I wanted to use that money to build strong foundations for lives that had been dealt a difficult hand. Children who understood the value of love and gratitude. Thank you for spending this time with Dad's real-life revenge. Don't forget to share your own story in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe so you won't miss the next hard-earned lesson. My life now is simple and peaceful. I have found tranquility again. As I look at the engineering drawings spread across my desk, I realize a profound truth. In construction, defective material cannot repair itself. Life is no different. When betrayal has corroded something all the way to its core, covering it up only guarantees the collapse of the entire structure. Unconditional love does not mean unconditional surrender. A good father is someone who knows how to protect those he loves, but he must also have the courage to tear away the parasites that are consuming his family from within. Always keep the moral foundation of your life strong and steady, no matter how tempting the pressures around you may.